imagery. Yeah, that's right. I spend a lot of time looking at Google Earth, scouring the wastes of the Mojave Desert for isolated cabins, abandoned mines, and other unusual signs of man and his infinite wisdom. And sometimes viewers send me coordinates to check out, as was the case with my destination on this trip. If you look at Google Maps, there's this mysterious triangle shape on top of a mountain deep in Cottonwood Canyon. Because of its relatively uniform triangular shape, the person who sent it to me thought it looked man-made, like maybe some kind of giant geoglyph or land art installation. But that seemed kind of unlikely to me. It's so far out in the middle of nowhere that I just couldn't imagine why or how somebody could create such a big earthwork in such a remote and inaccessible location. It could just be erosion. It's probably just erosion. I'm sure it has nothing to do with aliens. I mean, it does kind of look like the perfect spot for a UFO landing pad. Way up on top of a mountain in the middle of nowhere in the mysterious hinterlands of Death Valley. And I did think it was kind of interesting how the triangle was bordered by darker colored rocks, almost like someone had built up some kind of crumbling stone wall around the perimeter. Could it actually be man-made? Now I was starting to get curious. So, even though I'm a pretty big skeptic and I was fairly certain it was just some random mountaintop, after a few days of stewing on it, my curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to get to the bottom of this mystery once and for all. My research indicated I could drive up Cottonwood Canyon Road to the very end, and from there I'd only have to hike a few miles overland to see this mysterious formation for myself. But as I approached the end of the road, I found it had been closed about 3 miles from the end, bringing the total distance I'd have to hike to about 6 miles. No big deal. I needed fresh air and exercise anyway, and I had plenty of daylight. But as I made my way up the canyon, I soon realized this was no easy hike. The road had apparently been washed out in a flash flood, and while the trail started out soft and sandy, it climbed gradually and relentlessly uphill. But I was motivated. I really wanted to find out what this triangle was. And it was an absolutely beautiful hike. Aside from the astounding rock formations towering above me on both sides, Cottonwood Canyon is also something of an oasis, home to a series of seasonal springs that were flowing pretty good in mid-January. Because of these natural springs, Cottonwood Canyon is a popular backpacking route, and it sure was comforting to see the presence of life-saving water in the middle of Death Valley. But the springs were also choked with dense vegetation. Not just the cottonwood trees that give the canyon its name, but also thickets of willows and thorny mesquite bushes that often obscured the trail. Hacking my way through the springs was much more time-consuming than I expected, and by the time I reached the point I'd plotted to turn off the trail and head up a side wash up the mountain, I was pretty far behind schedule. But like I said, I was extremely motivated, not just to solve the mystery of the triangle, but also because I really didn't want to spend the night in that canyon. I had all my camping gear in the car with me just in case, and I had even gone ahead and paid $10 for a backcountry camping permit, which is required in Cottonwood Canyon. But Death Valley was in the middle of a winter cold snap, and sleeping in my car just wasn't that appealing. The fact that my house and my cozy bed were only about 3 hours away spurred me on as fast as I could go, straight up the side of that mountain. words of the immortal Johnny Rotten. You ever get the feeling you've been had? Well, not had. Maybe sort of more like misled. Google! On Google Maps and Google Earth, this looked like a perfectly smooth, white UFO landing pad. But up close and personal, it's just a rocky, scrub-covered mountaintop. I mean, yeah, I guess it's relatively flat. And yeah, the rocks are lighter in color than the surrounding rocks. But any UFO that wanted to land up here would have to be four-wheel drive and high clearance, because this isn't exactly what you would call a smooth playa. And it really doesn't look anything at all like what I imagined it would, or like I imagine an alien landing pad would look, if that makes any sense. I don't know what I was expecting. Something smooth enough for the aliens to roller skate on, maybe? A place for the new Burning Man to be held? Oh, wouldn't that be something? If they had Burning Man up here, there'd be a lot fewer douchebags. Actually, if they started having Burning Man up here, well, there'd be an airport installed over in that corner in no time, so that Paris Hilton and P. Diddy and Mark Zuckerberg and all their cronies could come up here in style. Anyway, there's no Burning Man, there's no roller skating rink, there's no alien landing pad. It's just the top of a mountain. And the top of a mountain, I might add, that I have worked harder to get to than the top of any other mountain I've climbed to the top of, with the possible exception of Mount Whitney, which incidentally I think we can see over there. Isn't that something? I think, let me zoom in. Well, it's definitely the Sierra, and it's definitely covered in snow, and that's definitely the direction of Lone Pine, where Whitney Portal is. So I'll bet you anything, we can see Mount Whitney from up here. This is a pretty amazing view. I checked my altimeter, and we're about a mile high, around 5,254 feet. So even though there might not be a perfectly smooth UFO landing pad up here, well, I didn't hike up here for nothing. We have an amazing view in all directions. And since I hiked all the way up here, well, we might as well take a look around, because Lord knows the next time I'll be up here. Anyway, we'll start out looking west. Like I said, that's Mount Whitney. And then over here to the north, that's Cottonwood Canyon. That's the canyon I hiked up to get here. Down there, we can't see it. But then we'll pan to the east, and look at that. You can see all of Death Valley laid out before us. I mean, there in the distance, that's the Mesquite Sand Dunes and the little settlement of Stovepipe Wells, which is where I left the pavement, and God willing, where I'll be 3-4 hours from now, chowing down on a delicious burger. Oh my gosh, I worked up quite an appetite hiking all the way up here, and well, I could just go home and eat some Brussels sprouts or something healthy, but I don't know, man. I might have to stop in Stovepipe Wells and get myself a burger to celebrate summiting Mount, well, I don't even know if this mountain has a name, but hey, I'll just be like one of those white dudes back in the day who was the first white dude to climb to the top of a mountain and name it after himself. Now, I can't be sure I'm the first person to ever climb to the top of this mountain. I mean, if you think about the whole of human history, surely some Native American, some Paiute Shoshone, Timbisha Shoshone hiked up here at some point in the last 5,000-10,000 years, but you never know. Maybe they didn't, because there's no reason to come up here unless you have an overactive imagination about UFOs and landing pads. So I might very well be the first human being to ever summit this random mountain, which I hereby proclaim to be called Mount Hussy. Okay, you know Sir Walter Raleigh or Sir Francis Drake, whoever used to go around and claim lands in the name of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth I. Well, I'm claiming this mountain in the name of Her Majesty Wonderhussy the first and last and only. This is Mount Hussy. And just so they know when they make the next map of Death Valley, I went ahead and made a big H out of the darkest rocks I could find up here, which in my imagination would show up on Google Maps, but realistically is probably way too small. And oh my gosh, I'm too tired to go around and pick up even more rocks and make it bigger. So if you happen to look at Google Maps, a version that's been updated after January 22nd, 2025, well, check it out and see if you can see my H. Like I said, it's probably too small, but I'll know it's up here. Ah, man. You know that feeling of accomplishment when you did something that's really difficult? And especially if you tried to do it the first time and failed, and then you went back and did it again and succeeded? That's a feeling I have right now. I feel pretty good. Well, looking at the route I have to descend makes me feel a little less good, but I'll be all right. In this instance, I feel like going down is going to be a lot easier than coming up. Oh my gosh, that was without question one of the toughest inclines I've ever ascended, and it doesn't look like much, and it didn't look like much when I was planning this trip, but it was slippery and it was steep, and every step I took I slid back at least a half a step. So anyway, I'm glad I'm at the top. Going down should be a lot easier. I'll be careful. I don't want to twist an ankle. Don't want to be that person that has to get rescued by the park rangers. But before I go down, I'm just going to take a quick break here. I'm going to eat some lunch. Okay, I didn't really bring anything fancy to eat. I got an apple. I got some beef jerky. I got a little baggie of macadamia nuts. And because the person who told me about this UFO landing pad in the first place is Canadian, I got a bag of cheesies. Yeah, they're like the Canadian Cheeto, but they're way better than Cheetos. These things are like crack. Might not even have to go to Stovepipe Wells for a burger after all. If I eat all these cheesies. Man, it sure is pretty up here. You know, there's something really neat about being way up at the top of the world at a place that few, if any, other humans have ever been. And it's interesting, too. We're like high enough that there's Joshua trees up here. I don't know if you can see that in the distance. I'll zoom in on that mesa ahead of us. There's a whole bunch of Joshua trees. In fact, there's some down here on the slopes nearer to me, too. How about that? All right, lunchtime's over, and it's time to start hiking back down to my car. But before I leave, one more look at this alien landing pad. You know, this is the kind of place that you really need a drone to appreciate. If I could fly my drone up, first of all, I could get an amazing panoramic shot of all of Death Valley. But secondly, I could give you an idea of what this looks like. And, well, maybe you'll understand why I thought it looked like an alien landing pad. But no drones allowed in Death Valley or in any national park. And, well, as I might have mentioned a time or two in this video, I'm in Death Valley! Now, how I said I could shout it from the rooftops? Well, I basically am on a figurative rooftop. So what better place than to let the world know I'm in Death Valley!
The human species has left the area. We now are preparing for landing